Hello everyone, welcome back. It is December, and even though it's only been about a month since the last installation of this series, GPU Price Watch, it feels like it's been a lot longer than that, and that's because memory prices have skyrocketed, giving GPU prices a run for their money. Therefore, I am expanding this series. It's not just GPU Price Watch now, it's Memory Price Watch too.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise. Tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. To be perfectly honest, I really wish I didn't have to do this series. I wish PC hardware pricing was just normal and I could go about my business and say, hey, you want to build a $1,000 computer? Here are some good parts to choose. But that's just not how it works. In order to make sure you're not getting ripped off, you need some contextual information to be able to say, what was the lowest price that these parts actually sold for and what are they selling for now? So here's a quick look at the December updates, and the main columns you're looking at here are going to be the average price for December, the low price for December. Then these columns over here show you the differences compared to previous months. While I'm at it, here's a quick look at the memory chart for this month. I'm going to be going over the memory a little bit later on, so use the timestamps in the description to jump to that, because I'm going to be starting with GPUs. Actually, I'm going to be starting by showing you guys how I'm gathering this information. I'm using PC Part Picker for any given GPU. I'm looking at the lowest 10 prices, averaging those, also highlighting the lowest price, and I'm also double checking the prices to make sure that it's being sold directly by a retailer, or at least by a reputable marketplace vendor from a site like Amazon or Newegg. So looking at the December chart, I wanted to highlight some overall trends. I do think that we have hit a bounce when it comes to GPU prices. If you look at the low price change for last month in November, there was still a lot of prices going down. Now we have prices bouncing a little bit and going back up. I've also used the classic bold function to highlight where the lowest price is, at least for the current generation of GPUs, both on the NVIDIA and AMD side. For some, that goes all the way back to like July for the 9060 XT. And while a lot of the lowest prices for NVIDIA cards, I think have maybe passed us by, although we'll see what happens in January. At least for now, we do have the lowest price options for the RX 9070 and 9070 XT 16 gig, which were obstinately refusing to come down in price for much of the year. But now, glory be, at least for the moment, we have good prices there. But since this is December, I thought we'd take a look back at the history of GPU Price Watch for this year, going all the way back to March, when the chart was a lot simpler, but also a lot more depressing. As you can see, there's pretty much red everywhere because everything was selling for much over MSRP. But the good news for GPU Price Watch throughout this year was this column. The low price changes often had a lot more green in it than red. And although this wasn't bringing us down to MSRP in April, for May, at least this price difference versus MSRP was starting to improve. Although I guess we did have the 5060 8 gig available at MSRP, and that's pretty consistently stayed that way because it's a crappy card. But it was actually a pretty nice and optimistic summer. You can see starting in June, we had MSRP pricing for cards going up to the RTX 5070, although the 9070 and 9070 XT were still pretty obstinately overpriced, but we also had some competition with the 9060 XT and 9060 XT 16 gig. And as things warmed up in July, we had lots of prices getting lower again. We added the Intel Arc cards a couple months back, so those are also coming down, with the first cards significantly below MSRP being the 9060 XT, which was down to $250 for this month, and the 5060 Ti 8 gig being one of the first RTX 50 series cards to drop below MSRP too. And then came August, where we had like MSRP or better for every single RTX 50 series GPU. Sure, the 9070s were still being done, but you at least had 9060s down there, keeping things a little bit competitive in the lower price range, along with Intel's Arc cards being just slightly over MSRP. Then in September, we once again had price drops for several RTX 50 series cards, with at least 3 of them becoming below MSRP. We even had some improvement on the Intel Arc side. It was just AMD who was still struggling to get their act together with the Radeon 9000 series cards. And then in October, just look how much green there was. Perhaps this was a distraction, because October was also when RAM prices started to go up. But we were all like, oh, look, GPU prices are pretty good. There were MSRP RTX 5090s. We finally had the 9070 non-XT coming down to its MSRP. 9070 XT was still $30 over, but relatively looked better. And things were good and happy. for a brief period of time. You had this little window, and on the GPU side at least, things continued to look pretty good in November. Granted, there's usually a lot of sales around the November timeframe because of Black Friday. But once again, apart from the 5090, we had good sales, good pricing on pretty much all of the NVIDIA cards. We had MSRP or better for every single RX 9000 series card, even Intel's Arc B570, B580 coming down to less than their MSRPs. But of course, November was when all the memory prices started to go up and up and up. So once again, that brings us to December, where we can see this unfortunate spate of red across many of the NVIDIA RTX 50 series cards, which are the more desirable cards. It looks like our low prices for November were kind of the high water point or low water point, depending on how you're looking at it. That is apart from the 5050 8GB and 5060 8GB, which I don't really highly recommend unless you're on a serious budget and you know you're going to be gaming on like a 1080 panel for the next few years. I highly recommend trying to get yourself up to a 12GB or 16GB card if you can manage that. So despite the 9060 XT 16GB being up $20 from its low of $350, it is still, I think, the better bet if you're considering an RTX 5060 8GB. I think it's worth the extra money. Or of course, you got the 5060 Ti 16GB if you want an NVIDIA card with a higher VRAM buffer and you're not paying 5070 or better money. Nevertheless, these are the highlights for this month. We have a $200 RTX 5050 8GB, which is the lowest price that I have ever seen it at. It does include a $20 mail-in rebate, so that may or may not be worth it for you. And then the 5060 8GB currently selling for $279. That's over at Walmart. I think Best Buy might have had that price as well. In terms of best bang for the buck mid-range graphics card, the RTX 5070 at $520 is still recommended, even though it's about $40 up from its low of $580. But if you're not married to an NVIDIA solution, the Radeon RX 9070 non-XT is a 16GB card at $530. Between the two of these, I would go for the RX 9070 non-XT. I guess one last NVIDIA thing to point out is the cheapest RTX 5090. I was recommending people to try to wait for these to sell at their MSRP at $2,000, but we haven't seen that for 2 or 3 months unless you're really good at jumping on a listing that goes up for sale, but those have been selling out fairly quickly. Unfortunately, it's sad that these cards are moving so quickly at their prices, but this one at least is add to cart ready at Best Buy for those of you who have deep pockets. Last highlight would be the 9070 XT at $600. Again, it's MSRP, it's not exciting, but it is at least a compelling alternative to a 5070 Ti, which is going for $750, which again is up from its low last month of $730. All right, switching over to Memory Price Watch, the slightly more depressing part of this series. I have just listed 3 different RAM configurations over here, pretty common ones. The 32GB DDR5 configuration, a 64GB DDR5 configuration. For DDR4, I'm just looking at 32 gigs as well. I could potentially expand this in the future, so if you guys have any feedback for me on that specific RAM configurations or types, please leave that in the comment section down below. My sub-listing for each of these is basically what I would consider to be a good kit of RAM versus a bad kit of RAM, or I guess a kit of RAM that would be functional but not necessarily getting the most out of your system. So for DDR5, that's DDR5 6000 or better with CAS latency that's less than or equal to 32. A bad RAM kit, or just trying to get yourself a functional kit for as little money as possible, would be slower than DDR5 6000 with CAS latency more than 32. Then pretty much that same thing applied to the 64GB configuration, whereas for DDR4, we have DDR4 3000 or better with CL less than or equal to 16. And then the slower DDR4 is going to be slower than DDR4 3000. And since these kits do not have MSRPs, I was just looking at the late September or early October pricing where it was kind of at its lowest before things started to creep up. I did list the specific kits where I was getting these prices from, like the Team Group T-Create Classic that I've recommended many times, although this is the bad kit because it's DDR5 5600 CL46. Meanwhile, for 64 gigs, we have a G.Skill Flare X5 kit, a Crucial Pro, and then for DDR4, a Corsair Vengeance LPX kit, as well as a G.Skill Aegis. Beyond that, it's pretty straightforward. We have the before times pricing right here, and then we have both the low price and the average price for December using pretty much the same data gathering method that I showed you guys before with PC Part Picker. And here we can see the stark changes just in the past month and a half to 2 months. DDR5 6000 32 gig kit going from $90 up to about $300 at the cheapest. These two columns are the same because I'm just comparing the before pricing to the after pricing, but those will change as I continue this series in January 2026. Specifically, the best price I was able to find today on a DDR5 6000 speed kit with a decent CAS latency and everything, CL30, is this Clev kit, and you actually are buying directly from Clev. At least they have 85% positive feedback directly on the Clev store. It's also not going to arrive until late December or January, but at least it's a $300 32 gig DDR5 kit. Your situation is maybe a little bit worse if you need more capacity. This is the best viable 64 gig kit, DDR5 6000, that I was able to find. It's $678. Wait, no, there's a promo code. A great sale brings it down to $628. It's $50 off. But look, RGB. That's totally worth these price increases, right? If you really need a 32 gig kit and you don't care about speed or timings, this is the cheapest possible one that I was able to find on PC Part Picker. It's a Crucial kit, so that means it's also going to be an antique soon, right? Because they're going out of business. Maybe the prices on these will go up even more. But yeah, DDR5 5600 and CAS latency 46. Is this memory even going to function? It seems pretty dismal. Likewise, we have a Crucial kit for our best 64 gig option at $508. At least it's in stock over at B&H. But yeah, just pretty depressing across the board, and we can see that 32 gig kits are pretty much 3 times the price that they used to be, over 300%. 64 gig kits are roughly the same, maybe slightly less increased. They're at about 300% of the price they used to be. And I guess the only silver lining for anyone who's looking for a DDR4 kit is those prices haven't spiked quite as much. They've only gone up just a little bit more than double, jumping from $70 to $80 to about $150 to $170. But there it is, my final installment for GPU Price Watch 2025, now adding RAM Price Watch 2. Not that I really wanted to do that, but I feel compelled to. I'm going to be continuing this in January if you guys are interested. We'll see. Are prices going to keep going up? I think maybe they will based on what we've been hearing, but I will at least be verifying this with real world numbers, sharing that information with you guys. So if you're not subscribed, consider doing that. You could also hit the thumbs up button on this video if you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to help support my channel, you can check out my store at paulshardware.net, where we have an end of the year sale going on. At least my prices have come down a little bit to end the year. But that's all the time I have for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you all in the next video.